All right, I guess that's it for this morning. Thanks everybody for coming. Appreciate getting up early on the second day of NICconf for this using Ansible for your configuration management on Windows session. All right, yeah, my name, David O'Brien. I had to remove that from the slide. Quick introduction. David O'Brien. I'm a so-called senior DevOps engineer at Monitor Consulting in Melbourne, Australia. You might notice my accent is not Australian. I'm half German, half Scottish, from Germany actually, so not from that far away. However, I do live in Melbourne, which is quite far away. 30 hours, 18,000 kilometers actually, so quite a travel. If you want to get in touch with me, my Twitter handle is up there, my blog, david-o'brien.net. I used to be a PowerShell MVP for 7 days until they changed the whole MVP program, basically, and renamed it to Cloud and Data Center Management MVP. Worked quite hard for those 7 days. Anyway, so now I'm a CDM MVP again. And I'm also an author for the PowerShell magazine. If you don't know about the PowerShell magazine, it's powershellmagazine.com. Released by, or founded by Alexander Nikolic, who's also a speaker today. So what's on the agenda for today? Quick introduction to DevOps, because a lot of people say DevOps, but don't get me wrong, a lot of people don't even know what DevOps really means in that case. So I'm also going to talk about what is DevOps not. Then what is cross-platform management and why is it important? Who does it? Why do they do it? Going to go into Ansible. So what is Ansible? How do you use Ansible on Windows especially? I'm going to show you how you can execute PowerShell from Linux on a Windows machine. So it's something that quite a lot of people don't know that you can even do that. And then how to use PowerShell in Ansible for your configuration management solution. If you do have any questions, please shout, because those lights are quite bright and I can't really see everybody in the audience. So if there's any question, I'm happy to to go away from my presentation and just answer your questions, because this topic is really, really new to Windows guys. That's why there's not that many people in here. But in my opinion, that's where every company or every solution is going to head to in the future. So I really want to make sure that everybody goes out of here and knows what I talked about. And it's not like, he talked about that, I don't know, was it Ansible or something? And when somebody asks you, so what was it about? No idea, have to watch the recording. If there's time, I hope I can show you how to at least write Ansible modules, or at least the concept of Ansible modules. So straight into it. What is DevOps and what is it not? It's not a product. So when I say I'm a DevOps engineer, it's actually a lie. You can't engineer DevOps. DevOps is a mindset. It's an attitude. It's something that your company has to embrace. So it's not something that you can buy. I would like to have 2 DevOps, please, for my company. And I'd like to have them in black and blue. Doesn't work like that. It's something that usually has to come from top down. So your management has to accept that your company is going down that DevOps route. Otherwise, it just doesn't work, because DevOps also means that you're responsible. Every single one in a team is now responsible for the outcome. Also means that you can make decisions. You're allowed, you're empowered to make decisions. It's not, we're using Ansible, we're using Chef, now we're doing DevOps. That isn't true. That's not what it's about. You can do DevOps without automation, strictly speaking. DevOps does help make your teams, your environment more agile. So what I mean by that is you can move at a faster cadence, where before it might have taken you months, maybe a year, to deploy a new version of a product into production. If you take that to an extreme, Agile and DevOps, you can do that in a day. Why? Because before, when you went and developed a whole product, enterprise release, that took you 12 months. Whereas maybe you only wanted to have that one function from that new product, new version. So in Agile and DevOps and that whole area, you go and only develop that one bit that you need. Develop, test, deploy. Done. Next, iterate. If there's a bug in there, you fix that. You develop, test, deploy. Over and over and over again. So when people actually mean we're doing DevOps, a lot of times what they mean is we're doing continuous integration. Every code commit you do gets packed, tested, deployed. That's what a lot of people mean when they say we do DevOps. Like I said, it's not a product. A lot of exclamation marks. You can't buy DevOps. It's a long, long journey. So if you're, I don't know, if you're Lufthansa, you can't just from now and to tomorrow, to the next minute, say, our whole company is now DevOps. Doesn't work. You start small, you start in teams, and then you span out. When I say you start in teams, you actually try to remove teams. By that, I don't mean fire them and get rid of them. You want to remove those islands of teams. I had a customer a couple of months ago where I was asked to implement some automation. And nowadays, any kind of scripting, if you don't doing source control, you're doing it wrong. So I'm sometimes quite strict with my views, but if you're not using source control, you're doing it wrong. So I asked him, so are you using source control? Answer was, nah. Why? And I'm pretty sure we don't use it at all. Well, I know you developed that one application, so your developers in that other part of the building, I'm pretty sure they use source control. Yeah, but those are the developers. We're infrastructure. Yeah, but maybe go and ask them, so what sort of source control are you using? Maybe you can reuse what they've already got, because developers are already usually doing quite a good job at that. Turned out they've already used Git for 5 years. They had that whole CI environment, and the infrastructure team only had to plug in their solution. Done. So it helps to talk and remove those artificial boundaries in your environment. It's not it's not the silver bullet that you hope it is. What that means is you can't just say, oh, we've got that problem here. If we now apply DevOps, that problem goes away. It doesn't. DevOps or Agile, in this case, or whatever concept you want to apply, just makes that problem surface earlier, faster. So if there is a problem, you don't see it 12 months down the track while doing the production deployment. You see it after maybe already a day or two or a week, halfway through the iteration. Oh, we've got that problem here. What do we have to do? Iterate on it, maybe do a spike, a quick POC, test, deploy. So maybe you can find that one big problem in your environment already after a week and not after 6 months, after proof of concepting, after writing detailed designs and all that kind of stuff. So that's just a quick introduction to DevOps, in my opinion, and what it's not. If you ask 5 people, you get 6 opinions, what is DevOps and what isn't it, what it's not. But I hope that at least matches most people's opinion of DevOps. So, straight into our actual topic. Why is cross-platform important? So when we're talking about configuration management, on Windows, that's a very new thing. Before we did that application deployment, we deployed an application, and basically that's it. We never touched it again until the next major update. And if there's usually an application that has a front end, maybe a mid-tier, and a back-end database, so front-end web server database. Somebody, maybe the config manager admin, was responsible for deploying that front-end application to the client. Then somebody else was responsible for deploying that and configuring that web server. And then the database team, the DBAs, were responsible for configuring and deploying, or deploying and configuring that database server. And they all had their own tools and ways of doing it. That one guy had a huge spreadsheet with 1,000 steps that somebody at 3 o'clock in the morning after a 12-hour shift had to follow, and surprise, messed it up. So why is cross-platform important? Because a lot of tools only run on Linux. A lot of other tools, especially those front-end client applications nowadays, run on Windows. But you want to have them all managed the same way. Like, a lot of companies, a lot of customers struggle with that cut-over phase. We update our backend, our database. Crap, now our front-end clients can't connect anymore because they're at a different version. So you want to manage them all at the same time, ideally, at least. So why is that hard? Why is cross-platform management hard? Because Linux isn't Windows. Stating the obvious, but a lot of people think Linux, or think Windows should be the same as Windows is. Windows should be the same as Linux, and Linux should be the same as Windows is. It's not. They're different. You just have to accept that. Doesn't matter how much you argue about it. I argue quite a lot about it with my coworkers because they're all Linux. Some of them have not touched a Windows machine in 15 years. They have no idea what Windows 7 or 8 or 10 even is. And when I go and say, oh, you have to use that PowerShell on that machine. Yeah, but why can't I use Python? Well, it doesn't exist. You can install it, but it doesn't exist. Yeah, well, why don't I just install it? Because you don't just install something on Windows. There's no such thing or good thing as package management right now. But there should be. Yeah, but it's not. So sometimes you just have to accept things are different. Like I said, why is it important? Environments are not heterogeneous. They are. They're not homogeneous. So they're not all the same. You've got Red Hat Enterprise Linux, you've got Ubuntu, you've got Windows 7, you've got Windows servers. And you all have to manage them somehow differently. Some applications, like I said, have front ends on Windows, back ends on Linux, and you want to manage them with one tool. So not one ring, but one tool. Um, so, this is on purpose very, very confusing. I did copy that from a slide from a coworker, and I thought that's not good PowerPoint skills. However, it makes clear that, and this is continuous integration, is hard. It's not easy to implement. And in this session today, we're only going to talk about this one bit. Ansible configuration management. All the rest of it should be a given. So you've got your developers, the guys or girls that code, that develop. Frederick and Niklas yesterday in their session asked, so who's a developer? And I asked, aren't we all developers? We write code, right? Who doesn't write PowerShell in here? Who doesn't? Okay, everybody, VB script? Okay, VB script, you're a developer. We're all developers, we all develop something. You're not just a developer because you write an application that somebody can click around in. If you write code that's in production or even used for testing or just configuring something, you're a developer, face it. So they're over there. Everything after that is completely automated, end to end. So as soon as somebody over there in the left corner goes and commits code to Git, something happens. Something happens, and that something is usually some CI tool like Jenkins, which kicks off some Ansible, which maybe deploys something onto AWS or Azure. If you want to know some more about AWS, come to my session at 1:20 this afternoon. I'm going to show you how to manage AWS with PowerShell, by the way. After that, Ansible goes and deploys stuff into different environments. Automated tests run, and we get that feedback loop back to the developer. And that's CI. A lot of people confuse that with DevOps. CI is part of DevOps. It's not the same. So Ansible. It's a configuration management tool. Some people argue it doesn't really do configuration management. It's more deployment. I'm going to touch onto that in a minute, why people say that. And they usually compare Ansible then to Puppet or Chef or some other tools. I on purpose didn't say DSC. DSC is not a configuration management tool. It's completely written in Python. I am not a Python guy. I can read Python, everybody can read Python. If you can read PowerShell, you can read Python. You can make sense of it. That's the beauty of PowerShell. Because it's written in Python, it's only supported on Linux. So the management host, the Ansible management host, has to run on Linux. Some people try to make it work on Windows with Cygwin, but some things just don't work. However, the target hosts can be Linux and Windows or Unix, as they don't really know the difference between Linux and Unix, because I'm not a Linux guy. When I say Linux and Windows, that can be on-prem and in the cloud. And it doesn't matter if it's Azure, AWS, Rackspace, Google Cloud Computing, IBM, whatever. Ansible has modules or resources for all those cloud providers already available. The, in my opinion, strength of Ansible is that it's completely agentless. So I'm going to demo that later on. You provision a machine, You add that to your inventory, and that's all you have to do on that machine, sort of. So compared to Chef or Puppet, where you have to first bootstrap your machines and install that agent and make sure that certificates are right and key pairs or certificates were exchanged, that all doesn't apply to Ansible. It's very, very lightweight on your machine. That said, you can still somehow make pull mode in Ansible work. I'm not going to go into that today because it's just a different way of working with Ansible. However, be aware you can, if you wanted to, get some sort of continuous management working on your target hosts. The other big strength, in my opinion, of Ansible is that your playbooks, so if you've been to the chef session yesterday, those would be your cookbooks, are written in YAML. I'm going to show you YAML in a minute. It's basically a text file, a glorified text file. That's it. It's not really code as in Chef where you have to write Ruby. That's YAML. There is some syntax behind it, especially on first lesson you have to learn on Linux is case is important. Uppercase, lowercase is a very big difference. It's just how it is. And indentation. So that's the only thing you really have to worry about. And from top down, what it would do, and it's really self-explanatory. First, I'm going to create a folder called cdeploy. That double backslash is because those YAML files are getting enumerated or expanded or worked with on Linux. And that backslash, a single backslash, comments out is the escape character. So if you want to write a backslash, you have to do the double backslash, especially in those paths. What a lot of people aren't aware of, you can also do the forward slash on Windows, at least in most scenarios you can. The Windows installer, for example, doesn't like a path with forward slash. Everything else on Windows does. So if you've done DSC before, this should look familiar. We've got the win_file resource, some arguments, win get URL, destination, URL, and the win.net, that's a custom resource that I've written to install.net, again with some parameters or arguments. Really easy, and especially, and again, that's what DevOps is also about. People that weren't traditionally developers now have to write their own solutions. So what I do, being the implementer, I go and implement Ansible in an environment and give people a platform to work on. Now, somebody who's not written Ruby will have a hard time getting into Ruby and write a chef cookbook, unless they can go and just get something from the marketplace or just do copy and paste from Google or Bing or something, or Alta Vista, if that's still around. YAML, then again, is really easy for people who've not done development before to just jump into and quite easily figure out what to do. Demo time. That's actually now already like 20 slides more than I've ever done before. So I really want to make sure that people understand what this configuration management is about. Before I jump into Ansible itself, how do we execute PowerShell from from Linux? So I've got some VirtualBox machines provisioned. Hope you can see that. Yeah. I deploy everything on my Mac via Vagrant. If you've not heard about Vagrant, go read up on Vagrant. Also works on Windows. Really, really easy to provision, test, or dev environments. So I've just SSH'd into my Ansible management host, Ubuntu, a 14.04 machine. And like I said, Ansible is written in Python. So the concept behind Ansible is that whenever you want to hit a remote target, it will open up either an SSH communication channel, or if it's Windows, a WinRM communication. Because it's Python, we have to use the PyWinRM module. So Python WinRM. If we were to use something like Ruby has its own WinRM gem, which in my opinion is a bit better, but Python WinRM, PyWinRM does the same thing. So I import that WinRM module into my Python environment, and now I have to cheat because it's just easier to copy than remember everything. So, oh, that's wrong. I've now built an execution string. So far, I've not opened any communication channel to my remote host. That's going to be the next step. What I'm going to do is I am going to download the GitHub setup executable from the internet. Just making sure that it's actually not there. So it's here. I remove it. Now it's gone. Next step is to open up that communication. So winrm.session, that method accepts a couple of parameters, the IP or the host name that I want to connect to. The authentication, in this case, because it's Vagrant, I have no big issues sharing my password. Vagrant, that's the default authentication or default user on Vagrant machines. And transport, I want to communicate via SSL. So I've now got a WinRM session object. And the next step in that WinRM object is I can go and tell it to execute that ps_script string. And that's odd. Of course it doesn't work because it's a live demo, and live demos never work. Let's try that again with the correct IP. All right, because we're in Europe, internet is freaking fast. And there's our GitHub setup executable. So it's not magic, it's not a big wow effect, but what I've just done is from Linux told a Windows machine what to do. Who's done that before? Okay, two hands. 3 hands, okay? So it's just something that a lot of people aren't aware of. Just opening up a WinRM channel from Linux to Windows works. It's just pure communication, and then you tell your machine what to do. And that's how Ansible works. Ansible will, and I'm going to show you the files in a minute, will tell Windows, hey, these files, I'm copying those now via WinRM into a temp location, and then please Windows go and execute them. That's how Ansible works. Error codes back and forth are all via JSON. So if you write custom Ansible modules, you should make sure that your standard out is converted to JSON, otherwise it just looks a bit weird. So, how does Ansible look like? That's VS Code. If you've not seen VS Code before, you should have a look or take a look at it. IDE, open source IDE from Microsoft, released a couple of months ago, I believe. I think around the October, November timeframe. Really nice. I used to use Sublime and Atom before. And now that VS Code has come out, switched over to VS Code. However, if you've got your favorite IDE already, maybe take a look, but not trying to convert you. Because that can start wars. If you ask somebody who's using Vim or VI to use something else, they're probably trying to strangle you. So, Ansible is just a collection of files. There's no service running on that Linux machine. There's no agent running on the remote target. It's just something, an executable that you go and execute, and because you execute that, something happens. There's no listener. You also don't get any reporting. So, yes, we're doing configuration management, but not over time. So it's just a one-off thing. Keep that in mind when you're trying to compare Ansible to tools like Chef and Puppet. The main file in any given Ansible role is the main.yaml that you can see here. And in here, you tell Ansible what to include, what to execute on your remote target. In this case, all I'm doing is I'm including or telling Ansible to include the prep.yaml and the ias.yaml. And when I take a look at it, at that prep.yaml, what it does, it gathers some facts. Facts are information about my remote machine. So if you've done Puppet or Chef before, Chef comes with factor, I believe, and Puppet uses ohai, or the other way around. But factor and ohai need their own Ruby environment, for example. What Ansible does is, on Windows, it executes just a PowerShell script, gathers some information about the machine. They're all hard-coded. I've got a pull request on GitHub open for the last 7 months, where I'm trying to get them to accept some custom facts gathering on Windows. So that's what I'm doing here. What you can get from that is basically anything or everything you like from that machine. Domain membership information, NIC information, user disk information, all that you might need during deployment later on. So you might want to know how much free disk space do I have on my remote target. If it's less than, I don't know, 5 gigabytes, I don't want to deploy AutoCAD, because for whatever reason it takes more than 5. So you can use that information later on. And then next step that gets executed is the ias.yaml. And the IIS.yaml, what it does, in this case, from top down, so it's all in order. It executes everything in order, so there's no randomizing in there. I install the IIS web service. Again, it's not rocket science that I'm just trying to prove a point or make a point here. I execute invoke DEC resource, so my target node has already got PowerShell version 5, production preview. If you're not aware, Microsoft had to pull the RTM version of PowerShell 5. If you're not aware that they did pull that, and you've already deployed RTM into your environment, go check if everything's still working. They had a very nasty bug with the PS module path, and they've still not re-released the RTM bits. So I'm on production preview, and I can use the invoke DEC resource, PowerShell commandlet. From Ansible's perspective, I'm using the raw module. Raw means whatever is in that value, so PowerShell exec command, whatever, that just gets sent over via WinRM and is executed. Using raw is not an ideal approach because we don't get proper feedback. Raw is not idempotent. So when we're doing or talking about configuration management, we want to achieve idempotency. Who's not familiar with idempotency or idempotency, depending on who you ask. So idempotent is I go and deploy something. It's not in the state I want it to be in, so something is changed. So now it's in the state that I want it to be in. I execute the exact same deployment again, and if it's already in that state, my code will figure out, oh, it's already in the state that I should put it in. I don't have to do it again. Done. So it's not getting changed again. If it's diverted from that desired state, it'll change it back again to the desired state. So basically, what it means is you can deploy the same thing 1,000 times. If it's never changing, my code will never touch it and never redeploy it, which makes deployments into existing environments very easy and very non-destructive. If they don't change, you can just schedule a deployment every night. If they don't change, nothing happens. The reason why I've still used raw here is because invoke DEC resource by definition is already idempotent. It's just that that feedback to Ansible is missing. In an ideal world, I would use Trond Hinnenes's win_DEC resource that he published to GitHub about 2 or 3 months ago, I believe. However, for various reasons, I wasn't allowed to use that resource in that environment that I've pulled that demo out of. Next step, enable anonymous authentication on IIS, standard PowerShell call, basic authentication. And then the next step is actually quite interesting, something that is hard to achieve in PowerShell. I've still not come across any actual templating in PowerShell. The win_template resource is a Jinja2 resource. So Jinja2 is a templating method. So you can see that the file extension here is J2. And what I'm doing is I'm telling Ansible use the test.htm.j2 file and copy it over to C, initpub, and so on. And when I have a look at that file, it starts with that hash sign, and with that next Ginger2, I'm telling Ansible, I'm telling Linux, hey, that's a Ginger2 file. And the new line sequence is important for Windows. Next, it's just an HTML or HTML code. However, if you have a look at line 6, I added that variable, so curly bracket, variable name, some top secret stuff. And what the Win template or Ginger2 engine is going to do is it will take that file and enumerate through it, parse it, and replace every variable with known values that it has in its environment. I can show you what top secret stuff would be. Where is it? Oh. That's top secret stuff. So Ansible has an executable called Ansible Vault, where I can encrypt top secret stuff, secret variables. So that I can go and put passwords, user credentials, database connections, or some top secret stuff that I don't want people to actually see into source control. Because again, we want everything in source control. We work as a big team, maybe with a dozen other developers on that one solution. We want stuff to be in source control. But we also don't want to have a local admin's password in clear text in source control, or anywhere for that matter. However, what I can do is have to go in here. Here. Go into my group vars directory, and I can now say Ansible Vault view this one, and it'll ask me for a password. And I can now see the content of that secret file. Ansible, during runtime, parses its whole playbook directory and looks for some certain files, basically, parses them. If it comes across an Ansible Vault file, it'll decrypt it in memory, and stores the variable, so the top underscore secret underscore stuff will become a variable, and with that, Ansible can now go and replace, for example, in our template, that placeholder with some actual values. So the next step, so that's the encrypted version again. Where was I? So that's how we build up a playbook. That's just what I want Ansible to execute. Now in my environment, I can just go and say Ansible and show you the how a basic call to a remote host would look like. So what I'm telling Ansible is, with that I, it's that inventory, so the target host, which module to use, so winping, which basically just pings the machine, connection winrm, which username, to ask for a password, and some verbose output. So we've got some, again, demos, some certificate issues on that machine. Just gonna I know why, sorry. Because I have to do that on here. Now it works. So that output up here, we can see first it establishes that WinRM connection for that user Vagrant on port 5986, so WinRM over HTTPS to that IP. I'm already on Ansible version 2. That's been released a couple of weeks ago. And Ansible version 2 in PowerShell uses strict mode. Be aware of that when writing your own modules. What it now does is, so you can see that put command, it, as I mentioned before, copies that win_ping PowerShell file over to our remote host. And then says, go and execute the code inside of that PowerShell script. And then, in the end, remove that file again. And that's our, in green, our successful output. So that's a very interactive execution. I'm now going to put that machine back to sleep and boot up another one. That's why I like Vagrant, because it's all on the command line. I can just spin up new machines when I like. That takes a couple of seconds. So what Vagrant does is it already forwards some default ports to that machine. In this case, WinRM. It knows how to communicate with that machine. And it also goes and shares some folders with that machine. So, just to check that we've got connection, I'm going to do the same thing as before. Yeah, so that machine's up. And so we've got IIS already on that machine. During preparation for this session, I've already done a deployment, so this is the end state. If my next demo doesn't work, that's how it's supposed to look like. And as it says, all my code is actually on GitHub. So you can just go to GitHub. I can give you the link later on. Or David O'Brien 1985, that's my GitHub name. Just go and look me up there. Everything I do code, and that's public, is on GitHub. So let's say that's our production website. We've spent thousands and tens of thousands of dollars for that production website. And now we need to change something. So somebody thinks just saying conference attendees is maybe too anonymous. We need to change that. So, just going to remove that one. So what we need to do is change something in our HTML or HTML template. So instead of just conference, I'm going to address the right conference. I save that file, commit my changes to GitHub, to my Git repository, and say, so there's an actual standard or style guide or best practice for Git commit messages. Change HTML template so that we are nicer to people. Commit that. I can now push that out to my GitHub repository. The nice thing with VS Code is that you can actually interact with your Git repository all from VS Code. So I could have also gone to the command line to my terminal and said git status, git add, git commit, git push, or before you push, if you're collaborating with other people on that repository, always do a git pull first. Don't push over somebody else's code. So what happens now? Because all I've done is I've committed some code, right? Nothing else. As I mentioned in the beginning, it's all about continuous integration, continuous deployment. And I don't want to go and now go somewhere into my repository or tell somebody, hey, can you go check out that file in that one repository? And then that guy is going to ask, oh, which repository, which file, which version? I don't want any manual interaction. So what happens is I've got Team City in my test environment, and that Ansible demo is hopefully going to kick off in a minute, unless it's got problems accessing the internet. We'll pick up on those changes in my Git repository and start deploying those changes. If it doesn't, I'm just going to kick it and see. So you could replace Team City with Jenkins, with GoCD, with AppVeya. So if you've not heard of AppVeya, it's a free CI tool, or free for open source and community stuff, CI. Seems to have some problems accessing the internet. Let's try again. Let's see what happens if I kick it off. So AppVeya can integrate into your GitHub repository, for example, and every time you do something, it will go and check those changes out and then do something to them. So this Team City build that just failed. Something's wrong with Okay, only 7 minutes left, I believe. I'm just going to jump over that. Something's wrong with accessing GitHub at the moment. So the idea is that every time somebody goes and checks in code, that code gets picked up and deployed into your environment, and then would have changed that string, that website. With that, any questions? Ansible, configuration management, Chef, Puppet, DevOps. Yeah?
When you run the script from Ansible, you want to use local admin, I guess, so that you don't
So those were two questions, I believe. One, in which context do you run Ansible? And can you enumerate the existing users on your remote machine, right?
And actually also, do you have access to the variables in the environment variables?
Okay, yeah, gotcha. So first, let's start with the second. Do you have access to environment variables, and do you have access to existing user environments? It's all PowerShell. If you can do it via PowerShell, you have. Then, yep, you can do whatever you want on that machine. So as long as you can do something in PowerShell on your remote host, it's possible to execute it via Ansible as well. The first question, which context does Ansible run? I used the vagrant user, which is a local administrator. You obviously need to use a user that's got that's allowed to access that machine via WinRM. So usually local administrators. But they're configurable completely. You can set those information via group vars or in the inventory file, where you can say the SSH user, they renamed that in version 2 to just Ansible whatever user, and the password. And that password in here, just right now, is in clear text. You obviously don't want that password to be in clear text. So we could move that into the Ansible vault file as well and have a different user for our database servers, for our web servers, all separated in different environments. So it doesn't have to be just one user. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
If you do it for servers, that's okay. But if you do it for clients, then because you have different users on your computers, so that you don't want to maintain an additional database beside.
Okay, gotcha. So you want to run something in that user's context that's on that machine. Sort of. You can connect to that user in the context of a generic local administrator. So you should have one local admin on all your desktops, all your machines, and then impersonate a different user from PowerShell. If that's enough, if you can do that, if you can work around UAC and all that stuff, then yeah, I don't see a reason why not. However, sometimes UAC gets in the way and just doesn't work. Or if you have to actually then elevate from a regular user to an administrative shell, that's sometimes a bit tricky. Okay. If you've got a couple of minutes after the session, I'm going to try to get that demo working. Just one more thing. So I said it's all PowerShell. So the .NET version, or the .NET resource that I talked about, and every custom resource that you write, again, it's all pure PowerShell. If you can write PowerShell, you can write Ansible resources. Before I've ever even seen Ansible, I was able to write an Ansible resource. Somebody told me, oh, you just have to write a PowerShell script and have it accept some parameters, and then we can just chuck it into Ansible, and that's it. There's a couple of things that you have to know. The Ansible documentation is actually quite good. If there's issues in there, just open up a pull request on GitHub, and they're going to match that into their documentation. So getting into Ansible is really, really easy and straightforward. And again, it's all just pure PowerShell. So if you can manage to get Ansible working, I've got a blog post on my blog explaining how to get Ansible up and running via Vagrant in, I don't know, less than 10 minutes on your machine, and then you can just go and start playing. All right. Yeah, one last question. Yeah.
file. Because all the hosts that you want to connect to, you have to define in your inventory file.
Yeah.
So if you have like thousands of computers, how would you manage that file?
So question is, how would you manage your inventory file if you've got thousands of servers and maybe servers that change their host names, so cloud environments maybe? So there's a concept of, so the inventory file that I've shown you is a static inventory. Ansible also knows a dynamic inventory, where you can just, where you write an executable inventory file and, for example, hit a web service or hit a database. As long as you return a JSON file or JSON object back to Ansible, it can work with that and go on from there. So there's ways around that static inventory. Okay. Again, these are my contact details, all very beautifully put into a PowerShell class, PowerShell version 5, if you're not aware of that. Again, thanks for coming. I'll be around until this late afternoon. I'm flying out tomorrow morning. And if there's any questions, just hit me up on Twitter, email, whatever. I'm usually quite good responding to emails. Again, come to my session at 1:20. Thanks for coming. Hope you enjoyed the session.